Conversion tracking is the number one skill you should improve in order to get better at PPC. No matter your skill level, if you get better at conversion tracking and attribution, you get better at not just pay-per-click, but marketing and business in general. The reason conversion tracking is the number one skill is simple. Conversion tracking is the number one thing that most Google Ads accounts get wrong. Ask anybody who owns a PPC agency and is tasked with auditing accounts frequently. The number one thing that is almost always broken or set up incorrectly is conversion tracking. Therefore, knowing how to properly set up conversion tracking immediately puts you in a position to fix thousands of accounts that are being improperly managed. In the last episode of the PPC Unleashed podcast, we talked about the 4 levels of Google Ads expertise: beginner, intermediate, advanced, and master. Learning about conversion tracking and attribution, which was one of those categories that we looked within each level, is really what allows you to progress from beginner to intermediate to advanced and master. And even if you're already a master, there is always more you can learn when it comes to conversion tracking. Because conversion tracking isn't just about making sure that you're measuring form submissions correctly. Sure, at its most basic level, that's the bare minimum that you're trying to accomplish. But advanced conversion tracking is really more of a game of attribution, where you play a detective that has to put together the puzzle of where conversions are actually coming from and make sense of the mess that is attribution in 2024. Think of it like the board game Clue, but instead of having to figure out who's responsible for the murder, you need to figure out who's responsible for your conversions. And if you're playing in the lead generation mode of the game, in this game you also need to figure out what happened to your conversions after they came in. Therefore, the true masters of PPC are those that have put on their detective hats and dug deep into Google Ads accounts, into analytics accounts, into Google Tag Manager accounts, into website backends, and into CRMs, and even third-party attribution tools. And at times, they have looked like the Charlie meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And if you don't get that reference, just Google Charlie meme and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Because while the game of attribution sounds fun, it's actually the most difficult and often most frustrating part of pay-per-click advertising and marketing in general. It's frustrating because Google, Meta, Microsoft, and every other platform out there is lying to you. These platforms are interested in taking more credit for conversions so that you spend more money on them. If you are running Google and Meta ads simultaneously, you could find that both platforms take credit for the same conversions, or you could find that one platform did 90% of the heavy lifting and another did 10%. But the one doing 10% gets 100% of the credit, while the one doing the heavy lifting gets none. So for example, let's say you're spending money on both Meta and Google Ads, and you have a brand campaign on Google Ads. And then you target people on Meta, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, and you're hitting them with dozens of ads for 3 weeks in a row. And the person doesn't convert for 3 weeks in a row, but one day they wake up and they feel like, that company that I saw the other day, let me Google them. And they click on the branded ad and they end up buying the product. So Google, in this case, gets 100% of the credit, and Meta, depending on the situation, maybe Meta got 0% of the credit in this situation. So one channel did all the heavy lifting, the other channel did almost nothing, and one channel gets all the credit. So this is what we're talking about here. I've seen companies waste thousands of dollars spending money on the wrong channels because they were just not attributing conversions correctly. This is the reason third-party attribution tools like Triple Whale, Northbeam, and others even exist, to provide that unbiased data. Because even if you think a platform like Google Analytics is unbiased, it's not. It's not crediting any of your social media platforms as much as it's crediting all of the Google channels. But even those third-party attribution tools, by their own admission, miss so much because sometimes buying decisions come down to what people are doing offline, or even what's in their hearts and minds. So unless you have mind-reading powers, attribution can sometimes be a guessing game of, I think this is what happened because of X, Y, Z reason. The other reason learning conversion tracking is more important than ever is because it's getting more and more difficult to track conversions in 2024. More people are using ad blockers that prevent tracking codes from firing. Browsers such as Safari and now Chrome are blocking third-party cookies, and government regulations and user consent laws, especially those that we're seeing already in Europe, are causing huge disruptions in conversion tracking. So if you can help navigate a company through all of these challenges, you will really stand out as a true expert, and you will earn that company's trust very quickly, which is the foundation for a lasting relationship with any client. Here are some of the things that advanced conversion tracking and knowledge of attribution can help you achieve. You can track more conversions than you would have missed otherwise. And as in the examples that I gave before, if you have a proper conversion tracking setup, you're not importing your goals from Google Analytics, for example. You're actually setting up your own goals with the Google tag, using Google Tag Manager, etc. you're able to track and measure more conversions than your competition. You can optimize your campaigns more efficiently for better results. So if you have more conversions, you have more pieces, more levers you can pull, you have more data sets that you can use, and you can make more efficient and better optimizations, which will deliver better results for your campaigns as well. You'll be able to explain those difficult to answer questions. For example, why do we have very good months followed by very bad months? Those difficult to answer questions become more clear when you have proper understanding of attribution and the different channels and everything that is working together. You'll be able to report more conversions to your clients, which again is very important, because if you report more conversions, you have a higher likelihood of keeping the client, first of all, because they'll see that you're actually delivering results. But transparency is also a big factor in this reporting element here, because you'll be able to show the client with you'll have better proof that your conversion tracking setup and everything that you're doing is actually aligned with what the client is seeing as well. And having advanced conversion tracking can help you scale an account significantly beyond what you would be able to do normally. So for example, let's say you're importing offline conversions from a CRM into Google Ads, and you're able to track qualified leads, sales qualified leads, maybe even revenue in a lead generation account. If you're doing those kinds of things, you can literally show a ROAS, a return on ad spend, to the client, in which you'll be able to more easily scale an account, because you actually have proof that, hey, we made 20,000 last month and we only spent 5,000. Why don't we scale to 10,000 and see if we can make 40,000? So that kind of thing, that kind of conversation becomes possible through offline conversion tracking, which again is a more advanced setup of conversion tracking. So a few months ago on LinkedIn, I posted an article that was similar to what this podcast episode is about. And I said that if I'm looking to hire a PPC expert, I really don't care how well you build campaigns or manage bids or write ads or research keywords or add negative keywords or look at the quality scores. And I certainly don't care at all about any of your Google Ads certifications. A few months ago, I was actually interviewing some candidates for an entry-level PPC position, and I saw some people that had some of these skills, but had I seen anybody that had advanced conversion tracking skills or even basic level conversion tracking skills, that candidate would have stood out to me in a much higher degree. So if you're somebody that's able to set up accurate conversion tracking in a Google Ads account, or using Google Tag Manager, not importing from analytics, right? So if you're able to track URLs, events, e-commerce data using Google Tag Manager, if you have the ability to discover, as I said before, like a detective, why conversion tracking is inaccurate or broken and know exactly how to fix it, if you know how to leverage and import offline conversions using Gclids or enhanced conversions, if you can analyze and explain lead and sales attribution in Google Ads, then I know that you're probably a top-tier PPC expert. If I had interviewed somebody that mentioned any of those things in a job interview, that person would immediately stand out, and that probably is the person that I would have hired right away. I think that if you work at an agency and if you don't have some of these skills and you acquire some of these skills, you'll immediately become more valuable at that company. You'll eventually manage the biggest clients at the agency, and you'll probably be promoted at some point, because you'll be the one that everybody knows is the go-to person that can solve conversion tracking problems. If you're a freelancer, I think it goes without saying you should even attempt to be a freelancer without some of these conversion tracking skills. Of course, because if you're a freelancer and you don't know how to set up conversion tracking, you're going to be dependent on somebody else to do it for you, whether it's the client that you're talking to and you're dependent on their developers knowing how to solve some of these things, or you're having to work with somebody else, which means that you're splitting part of the revenue you're collecting. But if you can do all these things on your own, as I said before, you immediately come across as an expert and somebody who knows exactly what you're talking about. So at this point, you might be wondering, where do I start? Where do I learn some of these skills? I think you should start by learning Google Tag Manager. If you don't know what Google Tag Manager is, it's basically just another platform in the Google ecosystem. So just like analytics, just like Google Ads, it's a platform where you log in, you have multiple users that have access to one account. And the way it works is that you install the Google Tag Manager code on your website, and then within the Google Tag Manager interface for that particular account, you can create a number of different tags and codes and things that you install on your website in a much easier, user-friendly way. So for example, if you want to track form submissions, if you want to track video duration, people that are watching videos more than 30 seconds, if you want to track clicks on a specific button, clicks on the email button, whatever you want to track, you can do it through Google Tag Manager in a more or less user-friendly way, as long as you know how to use the platform and what all these different things do. So that is where you start. You start by learning Google Tag Manager. So it's not as intimidating or as scary as some people might think. It's just the same way you learn how to use analytics, the same way that you learn how to use Google Ads. And Google Tag Manager actually speaks to these other platforms because you're able to create these conversion tags in Google Tag Manager that will fire depending on the different triggers that you set up. And you can send goals into Google Analytics 4 or into Google Ads or into both using the same trigger, for example. That way you make sure that Analytics and Google Ads are measuring conversions more or less equally because the real source of the conversion is coming from Google Tag Manager. So again, your conversion tracking is going to be better off overall if you know how to use and set up everything using Google Tag Manager. So how do you learn Tag Manager? Well, I'm going to give you two sets of options, paid options and unpaid options, free options. So for the free, I would say just start with YouTube. There are a lot of videos out there on YouTube that teach you how to use Google Tag Manager. There are two channels in particular that I recommend. Look up Measure School and look up Analytics Mania. These two channels have very good tutorials, long videos, short videos, all sorts of formats, and very updated videos as well. They're constantly releasing new updated versions because, of course, Google interfaces are always changing and settings are always changing, but they have more or less up-to-date videos that are 6, 7, 8 months old. Look up those channels, try to learn on YouTube for free as much as you can, and if YouTube doesn't work for you, I'm sure there's plenty of other Google Tag Manager resources out there on the internet you can find. For a paid version, which is the route that I went with the free first, and then I, let's say, upgraded to the paid because I wanted to invest in my own skills, and I bought a course by a company called PPC Mastery. If you follow a guy named Miles McNair, also a guy named Bob Miger on LinkedIn, you might be familiar with them because they're pretty prominent on that platform, and they have a particular course on conversion tracking. It's about 200 euros, but they might have some discounts from time to time, and I think it's worth it because it really taught me how to set up conversion tracking from the very basic level to really advanced offline conversion tracking techniques. So I'm going to talk about a roadmap of the different things that you want to learn when it comes to conversion tracking. And I'm sure that if you want to learn any of these particular skills, you can also find free videos that teach you how to do all these different things. But that course gave me a really good progression of, beginner to advanced conversion tracking techniques to learn. Taking a quick break here to remind you to please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, and subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to podcasts. Also, please share the podcast with whoever you think could find it valuable. It'll mean the world to me. It'll help the podcast grow. So I would highly appreciate it if you could share the podcast and spread the word about what we're doing here at the PPC Unleashed podcast. And with that, let's keep going. So here's a roadmap of what I think you should try to learn from beginner to advanced. Start by learning the basics of conversion tracking in Google Ads. And again, you can probably find courses on YouTube that teach you the basics of conversion tracking. So at the very least, you want to learn the differences between primary conversions and secondary conversions. And you want to learn how to create conversion goals in Google Ads and the different options that you have, whether you're using a website, whether you're using an import from click setup, different setup options that you have on Google Ads, and just know how to create those goals and some of the settings that you have inside of the Google Ads account. That would be the first place to start. Number 2 would be to learn how to use Google Tag Manager, and this is the point where you start to pick up on some of those courses for Tag Manager and learn how to track at least form submissions using Google Tag Manager. That would be like the first step. And the easiest would be how to track form submissions, perhaps using landing page URLs. So you might have a thank you page and you put that thank you page URL as the trigger, meaning when the person lands on that URL, that fires the conversion, that sends the tag into Google Ads, and that's what you want to learn how to track, and that's the first step. Next, see if you can learn how to track events. So maybe you want to be able to track specific clicks on specific elements of your website, or perhaps you're working on a website that does not have a thank you page, so you want to learn how to track conversions from just click on a submit button, for example, that does not lead you to a thank you page. Maybe it just has a pop-up or something along those lines. So try to learn how to track conversions from events. That would be number 2. Number 3, again, all within the second category of just learning Google Tag Manager, The next step would be to learn how to implement conversion tracking for e-commerce accounts or track revenue. And this is definitely more complicated, but if you are managing any e-commerce accounts, one of the biggest mistakes we often see is people importing their conversion value goals, the revenue goal or the transaction goal from Google Analytics 4. The reason this is bad is because Google Analytics is just missing a lot of conversion data, a lot of revenue. Because when you compare the Google Analytics 4 goal versus the Google Tag Manager goal or the Shopify Google Ads integration goal, the GA4 goal misses a lot of revenue data. You have way fewer conversions and less revenue. And the Tag Manager goal actually does even better than the direct Shopify integration goal. So with Shopify, you're able to just connect your Shopify account to your Google Ads account, and Shopify will create the goals for you. And this is fine, but I've seen that the Tag Manager goal, the Google Tag Manager goal that you set up, tracks more conversions than even that direct integration. And the advantage of having the Tag Manager goal, as you'll see in one of the following steps, is that you're also able to send more data to Google Ads that allows you to make better optimization. So learning how to track e-commerce data using Google Tag Manager would be the next step, and it's also going to be very important for you to eventually learn. That would be the second category, the second level. The third level would be offline conversion tracking. So if you don't know what offline conversion tracking is, it's essentially importing conversions that are happening offline in the business. So for example, you're tracking form submissions, that's an online conversion because it happened on the website. But what happened to that form submission? Well, presumably the business contacted that lead, and that lead turned potentially into a sale. The sale would be the offline conversion because it happened offline. So the goal here would be to import that sale into Google Ads so that you see, first of all, how many of your form submissions are turning into closed deals and how much revenue is the business making from those closed deals. So you're essentially turning, and if we're talking about lead generation, you're turning a lead generation account into sort of an e-commerce account where you're trying to where the goal is really to measure a return on the ad spend. But this can be a little bit difficult to do because sometimes some businesses there can be a very long gap or lag between the time that it takes, depending on the sales cycle, right? The time that it could take from a conversion on the form submission to a sale. It could be a long time for some businesses, especially those that are in the software as a service space or other B2B companies. But if you're working in something like pest control, moving companies, home services, that kind of thing, it's usually a very short amount of time between the form submission and the conversion. So it's a lot easier for those kinds of businesses. But it's definitely something that you want to track because, again, you'll be able to measure more significant information and have those higher level discussions with your clients about how their business is actually doing and how Google Ads is impacting the revenue for their business. So why is this powerful? Because if I'm optimizing a Google Ads account that has offline conversion data, I'm able to see not just the conversions and which keywords and which ads have conversions, but I can see which keywords, which ads, which ad groups, which search terms, which devices, which locations, every element of the Google Ads account. I can see what drove sales, revenue, marketing qualified leads, closed deals, depending on what you're importing into the account. This is very powerful because you can make optimizations that are a lot more meaningful. Now you can really move the needle because you have an understanding of the changes that you're making are actually leading to successful results for the business. So you want to learn how to upload offline conversions from clicks using the gclid method, the GCLID method. That would be the first step, is learn how to create a spreadsheet in which you paste your GCLID, and the gclid is the Google Click ID. The Google Click ID is a code that is associated to every single click on every ad on Google Ads. So every time somebody clicks one of your ads, a gclid is created, and that in the URL the person landed on has a gclid. So just test it yourself. Go on Google Ads, find any sponsored ad, click on it, and you'll see that the URL has a little piece of code that says GCLID, and then there's going to be a equals, and then there's going to be a long string of code. And that piece of code is unique to that click, and it registers everything about the click. It knows the time the click occurred, the location the click came from, what keyword is associated to the click. Everything in the Google Ads account that is associated to the click is registered. So that is the piece of code that you use. The gclid is the piece of code that you use to import your offline conversions. You have to know what click led to that sale, and then learn how to upload that sale using that gclid back into Google Ads. So that would be the first step. Now, there's a different method for doing this called the enhanced conversions for leads method. And instead of using the gclid, you use the person's email and phone number. So Google is able to identify that if a person email and phone number converted, you use that email and phone number, import it into Google Ads, and if it matches, Google is able to identify, again, the same way, the keywords, the ad groups, the campaign, the device, the location, etc., that created that conversion. So you can import your offline conversions using the gclid method or the enhanced conversions for leads method. So learn both of them. And then you can also automate this entire process, because you can do this manually, and you can do this, for every single conversion. You can upload 10, 20 conversions at a time, creating a spreadsheet. You go into the Google Ads, into the uploads tab of the conversion section, and you upload your conversions. But you can also schedule your uploads, and you can use the platform called Zapier to automate and schedule gclid or enhanced conversions for leads uploads into Google Ads. So if you can connect Zapier to your CRM, and you can create a Google Sheet in which all these things will be populated automatically, and you can figure out a way to do that, you can actually connect that Google Sheet to Google Ads and actually create a schedule where maybe once a week or once a day, depending on how many, on the volume of conversions that you're actually getting. So once you set this up, it's done automatically for you from that point forward, and you have that data flowing into the account consistently. So that is a more advanced level, but that is also a very important step in getting that enhanced data into the Google Ads account, and that's something that you should learn. And finally, the most advanced level that I'm going to mention here, there's even things that you can do beyond that, but for today, let's leave it with just the ability to measure more data with Google Tag Managers that you can get into Google Ads. So similar to what we were talking about with the gclids before. With Google Tag Manager, you can send things like the transaction ID, which is essential if you want to do dynamic remarketing. Dynamic remarketing does not work if your Google tag is not sending the transaction ID back into Google Ads, because that's the only way that Google is able to identify and create that dynamic remarketing list, or that list that is used for dynamic remarketing campaigns. So if you can figure out how to do this within Google Tag Manager, send the transaction ID, you'll be able to create those remarketing lists for dynamic remarketing. You can send things like new versus returning customer data as well. So you'll be able to segment. If you go into the segment button on, let's say, your campaign view, you have a few, under conversions, you have the ability to segment by new versus returning customers. But if you're not sending this data, it's all going to be empty. It's going to be under the unknown category, perhaps. But if you can send this information from Tag Manager into Google Ads, when you click on new versus returning customers in that segment, you'll be able to see how many of your conversions are coming from new customers and returning customers. And of course, for e-commerce, this is going to be essential, because the goal a lot of the time is going to be to get more sales from new customers versus returning. Because if your only buyers are returning customers, the business is not growing. But if most of your buyers are new customers, that means the business is growing. So that's an example of the kind of data that you can send. And the most advanced version of this is actually custom variables. So you can actually create your own segments, essentially, by creating variables that are specific to your business. So for example, you might be a pest control company, and your form submission has a drop-down that allows you to select the pest that the person wants to get rid of. So the drop-down options might be cockroaches, might be rodents, might be termites, etc. And if you create a custom variable in Google Tag Manager, you can actually create a custom segment in Google Ads that will allow you to segment your conversions in, let's say, the campaign view, to see how many of my conversions were for people that selected cockroaches, how many of my conversions were people that selected termite, etc. So you can see that can be a very powerful thing, because you'll be able to make better, more advanced optimizations. As I was saying before, as one of the biggest reasons that advanced conversion tracking really turns you into a master is because you can really steer the campaigns and the Google Ads account in the direction that makes more business sense. Because maybe the most valuable of these is termite. I'm actually not sure if that's the case, but let's pretend that termite is actually the most valuable type of lead. Then you maybe want to add more termite keywords into the account, or you want to steer the campaigns in a way that is going to be more beneficial to the business. So that's the roadmap that I would recommend you follow to get better at conversion tracking. And with that, we conclude another episode of the PPC Unleashed podcast. If you listened all the way to the end, thank you very much. It really means a lot that you are listening, and hopefully you're finding a lot of value in the podcast. Please share the podcast with whoever you think could find it helpful, could find it valuable. And remember to subscribe if you haven't subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening. The podcast should be available at pretty much any podcasting platform out there as well. So with that, we get to the end of another episode, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much for listening.